Get up, Mariah. 6 years writing my name. Go find your own.
Your name. Say it again.
You've got 6 days to get your things out.
Fine. 6 days. You should look closer at that contract before you celebrate.
The lights are on inside the house, warm, gold, like nothing is wrong. Mariah is on her knees on the driveway. Her suitcase has already tipped over. Her clothes are spilling out across the stone, a blue shirt, a framed photo, face down. Daniel is standing over her, finger pointed. Voice sharp enough to carry to the street. 6 years, Mariah. 6 years writing my name. Go find your own. Behind him in the doorway, a man in a dark suit watches, doesn't move, doesn't blink. His name is Preston, and he's the only person on that driveway who already knows what Daniel doesn't. Mariah doesn't answer. She doesn't cry. Not yet. She just looks up at her husband, at the house, at the car he's about to get into and drive away in, and she says nothing. Because in 6 days, he is going to find out exactly whose name has been on every page of the deal that made him $66 million. And it isn't his. My name is Mariah King. And for 6 years, I was the smartest person in every room I was never invited into. 6 years earlier, none of this would have made sense to me. I loved him. I still do, if I'm being honest, which is its own kind of humiliation. Daniel Moore was the first person who ever looked at a spreadsheet I built and called it beautiful. Not smart, not useful, beautiful. I was 28, working freelance out of a studio apartment on Del Mar Avenue, and he hired me to clean up a set of numbers for a strip mall deal that everyone else had already passed on. I found the thing nobody else caught, a zoning clause buried on page 40 that made the whole property worth twice what the seller thought. He closed that deal in 11 days. He proposed 14 months later, in the kitchen of the first house we ever owned together, holding a ring box in one hand and a glass of red wine in the other, and I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I want you to understand that part before I tell you the rest, because it matters. This isn't a story about a woman who married a man who never loved her. He did. He does, in the only way he knows how. That's what made it so easy for both of us to stop noticing what was actually happening. Here's how it works. When you're good at something and quiet about it, nobody sets out to erase you. It happens in small increments, so small you could set your watch to them and still miss it. It happens at 1 a.m. at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold beside your laptop while your husband sleeps upstairs and you build a financial model that will make him millions of dollars by 9 the next morning. That's exactly what I was doing the Thursday before the Ellison dinner party. Daniel had a pitch to close on a distribution warehouse outside the city, and the numbers weren't landing right. His in-house guy, a kid named Preston Vale, who'd been with the firm maybe 4 months, kept sending back projections that read fine on paper and fell apart the second you pushed on the assumptions. I remember exactly what I was wearing, an old college sweatshirt with a coffee stain on the cuff, because I remember thinking, if anyone from Daniel's office could see me right now, they would never believe I was the one keeping this deal alive. I rebuilt the whole cash flow model from scratch. I found a depreciation schedule error that would have cost him almost $200,000 in the first year alone. I sent it to him at 1:47 in the morning with a subject line that just said, "Fixed it, check the tab labeled real numbers." He read it over breakfast, said, "You're a genius. You know that?" Kissed the top of my head and left for the office. He never asked who built it. That's the part people don't understand until it happens to them. He didn't need to ask. In his head, it was simply Daniel's deal, the way it had always been Daniel's deal, the way the house was in Daniel's name, and the car service account was under Daniel's number, and the dinner reservations always said, "More, party of 6. I existed inside his name, like weather exists inside a season. Present, expected, never credited. The Ellison dinner party was 2 nights later, at a house in Ladue with a wine cellar bigger than our first apartment. Everyone who mattered in Daniel's world was there. Halbrook people, a city councilman, a woman from the paper who covered commercial real estate for a living. I wore the green dress he liked, the one that photographs well, and I stood near the bar with a glass of something I wasn't really drinking, and I listened to my husband tell the table about the warehouse deal. The depreciation schedule was a mess, he said, swirling his glass, warming up to it the way he always did when he had an audience. Everybody missed it. I sat with the numbers myself, found the error at like 1 in the morning, saved us 200 grand before we even got to the table. I did not correct him. I want to be honest about why, because it would be easy to tell you I stayed quiet out of grace or love or patience and let you believe I'm a better person than I actually am in that moment. The truth is smaller and uglier than that. I stayed quiet because some old, stubborn part of me, a part that started forming long before I ever met Daniel, believed that a woman who says, "Actually, that was me," at a dinner table, is a woman asking for trouble. My mother taught me that, though she never said it in those words. She said it with her whole life instead. So I smiled. I picked up a shrimp from a silver tray and put it on a small plate I never actually ate from. And I let my husband's version of that Thursday night become the only version anyone in that room would ever know. Across the table, Preston Vale was watching me. Not Daniel, me. He didn't say anything either. But something in his face told me he already knew whose handwriting was really on that model, and he filed it away the way people file things away when they think it might be useful to them someday. Later that night in the car, Daniel reached over and squeezed my knee at a red light. "You were quiet tonight," he said. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine," I told him. "Just tired." And here's the thing I need you to sit with, because it's the whole reason I'm telling you any of this. I wasn't lying to him in that car. I was lying to myself, and I'd been doing it so long I'd stopped noticing the difference. If you've ever done the work and watched someone else take the bow, if you've ever swallowed the correction because speaking up felt more dangerous than staying invisible, you already know exactly what that ride home felt like. Quiet, warm, and underneath it, something small and cold, curling up tighter, waiting for a room where it could finally stand up and say its own name. 6 years before that dinner in Ladue, before the ring, before any of it, I sat in my mother's kitchen in Ferguson watching her sign her name to a stack of papers she hadn't fully read. I was 22. I just graduated, still living at home while I looked for work, and my mother, Corinne Reyes, had spent 11 years building up a small property management company from nothing, 3 employees, a rented office above a laundromat on West Florissant, 40-some rental units she managed for absentee landlords who didn't want to deal with tenants themselves. She was good at it, better than good. She could read a lease the way other people read weather, could smell a bad tenant from across a parking lot, could make a spreadsheet sing. I used to sit at that same kitchen table doing my homework while she worked, watching her fingers move across a calculator like she was playing an instrument nobody else could hear. Her business partner was a man named Wendell Cross, a smooth-talking guy who'd put up half the seed money back when she had none, and who'd spent a decade letting her run circles around every problem, while his name sat first on the letterhead. That night at the kitchen table, he'd come by with papers restructuring the partnership, said it was routine, said it was about liability protection, said her signature was just a formality to keep the lawyers happy. She signed everywhere he pointed. I remember she was tired. She'd been at a property since 6 that morning dealing with a burst pipe, and her hands still smelled like the industrial soap from the maintenance closet. 8 months later, he pushed her out, cited a clause in those very papers that let him buy out her share at a valuation he set himself, low enough to be almost funny if it hadn't been her whole life. She fought it for a year with a lawyer she could barely afford, a man with an office above a nail salon who kept losing her file. She lost anyway. I remember the specific sound she made when the final letter came. Not crying exactly, more like something had been let out of her all at once, the way air leaves a tire. What stuck with me wasn't the money, though God knows we needed it. It was something she said to me a few weeks after, standing at the stove with her back to me, stirring a pot of something she wasn't really paying attention to. "I made myself too easy to see, baby," she said. "Man like that, he watches you shine, and he starts doing math on how to own it." She didn't say it bitterly. That was the part that scared me. She said it like a fact of nature, like telling me it rains in April. I didn't understand yet that I was going to carry that sentence around for the rest of my life like a stone in my shoe. I just knew I never wanted to make that particular sound my mother made at that kitchen table. 3 years later, Daniel and I were newly married, and I'd started picking up freelance consulting work on the side. Small stuff at first, a rent roll here, a cap rate analysis there, nothing that mattered much. I was doing it under my own name then, Mariah King, no different than anyone else billing hours off a laptop. Then I landed a bigger client, a mid-size acquisition shop, looking for someone to build out their underwriting models, and the man running it during our first Xavier said something that stopped me cold. He said, "You're sharp for a young wife doing this on the side. Does your husband know you're this good?" I laughed it off on the call. I did not laugh it off after I hung up. That night, I sat at our kitchen table, a different table, a nicer one, glass and steel, nothing like my mother's, and I opened a business registration site on my laptop. I didn't plan it the way people plan things in movies, with music swelling and a decision crystallizing all at once. It was smaller than that. It was just me, at 11 p.m., typing my mother's maiden name into a field that asked for a business identity, watching the cursor blink, thinking about a woman at a stove telling me she'd made herself too easy to see. M. Reyes King. Reyes for my mother, so some part of her would still be standing in every room I built something in. King, my own name. Small enough not to announce itself, easy enough to read past. I filed the paperwork before I went to bed. Daniel was already asleep beside me, one arm thrown over his eyes the way he always slept, completely unaware that his wife had just built herself a second identity 6 feet away from him for reasons she wasn't sure she could explain even to herself. I told myself it was practical. Clients took the name more seriously when it didn't sound like somebody's wife moonlighting for pocket money. I told myself it kept my consulting income clean from Daniel's business for tax reasons, which was even technically true. What I didn't tell myself, not for a long time, was the real reason underneath both of those that some old, careful part of me had decided the safest place to be brilliant was somewhere nobody I loved could watch me shine and start doing the math. That's the part of this story that's actually mine to own, and I want to be honest about it instead of making myself the only victim in it. Nobody forced me to build a wall between my name and my work. I built it myself, brick by brick, out of a fear that had nothing to do with Daniel and everything to do with a kitchen in Ferguson and a woman stirring a pot she wasn't tasting. 6 years of invoices went out under that name. 6 years of due diligence reports, risk memos, valuation models, all filed under a woman who technically didn't exist anywhere except on paper. If you've ever built a version of yourself specifically so you'd never have to find out what happens when someone decides you're a threat, I need you to hear this, because I didn't understand it myself until much later. Hiding your name doesn't protect you from losing everything. It just means that when you do lose it, nobody even knows enough to grieve the right person. I ended up at the Marriott off Highway 40, room 412, with a suitcase that didn't zip all the way because I'd packed it kneeling on a driveway in the dark. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without turning on the lamp, just the light from the parking lot coming through the curtains in one thin orange stripe across the carpet. My phone was face down on the nightstand. I didn't want to look at it. I already knew what would be on it and what wouldn't. Day one, I mostly slept, or tried to. The kind of sleep that isn't rest, just your body shutting a door because it can't process any more input. I woke up around 4 in the morning with my jaw aching from clenching it and ordered room service. I didn't eat a club sandwich that sat on the little round table getting cold while I stared at the ceiling and found a water. Stains shaped almost exactly like the state of Missouri, which struck me as funny in a way I didn't have the energy to laugh at. Day 2, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, just 3 words in the body. Check your accounts. I sat with that email open for almost 10 minutes before I did anything about it, turning my wedding ring around on my finger with my thumb, the way I do when I'm trying to decide if a feeling is real or if I'm inventing a reason to be afraid. I finally called a small credit union where I'd kept my consulting income separate for 6 years, a decision that had felt paranoid at the time and now felt like the only smart thing I'd done in a decade. The woman on the phone, kind voice, background noise of a call center, told me there'd been an inquiry the day before from a law firm representing Daniel Moore, requesting information on any accounts linked to my name in connection with marital assets. Did they get anything? I asked her, and I could hear how flat my own voice sounded, like it belonged to someone else. No, ma'am, she said. That account isn't under Mariah King. It's under a business entity, M. Reyes King, LLC. Different tax ID entirely. They'd need a court order specifically naming that entity, and from what I can see here, they don't have one yet. I said thank you and hung up and sat very still on the end of that hotel bed, staring at my own reflection in the dark television screen, thinking about a name I'd typed into a registration form at 11 at night 6 years ago because a man on a phone call once asked if my husband knew I was this good. Daniel's lawyers were looking for Mariah King's money. They didn't know Mariah King's money was small and unremarkable, and exactly what they expected it to be. What they didn't know existed was M. Reyes King, sitting quietly in a separate account, holding 6 years of a warehouse deal and a Halbrook contract and every project Daniel had ever put his own name on. The second email came that same afternoon. Same blank subject line. This one said, "You built more than he knows. Don't let them freeze the wrong thing." I stared at that one even longer. I didn't recognize the sender address. Some string of letters and numbers that told me nothing, but something about the phrasing snagged on me. Not "you built more than you know," that would have been generic. The kind of thing a stranger says to be kind. This said "than he knows." Whoever sent it knew exactly what Daniel didn't. I thought about Preston Vale standing in that doorway 2 nights before, still as a photograph, watching me on my knees on the driveway, with an expression I couldn't read at the time, and could suddenly read very clearly now. I didn't reply. I didn't know yet whether that email was a hand reaching out to help me, or a hand testing how much I already understood about my own situation. I called my mother that evening. I hadn't planned to. I was standing at the window looking down at the parking lot, watching a man load suitcases into the back of a black SUV, and something about the ordinariness of it, somebody else's ordinary Tuesday, cracked something open in me, and I picked up the phone before I decided to. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always did, like she'd been sitting with the phone in her lap waiting for exactly this call. I told her everything. The driveway, the suitcase, what Daniel said about writing his name for 6 years. I told her about the LLC too, the one I'd never told her the full truth about, only that I did some consulting on the side. When I got to that part, she went quiet on the other end for a long moment, and I could hear her kitchen in the background, the low hum of her refrigerator, a sound I'd know anywhere. "You used my name," she finally said. "Not a question. I used it to protect myself," I said. "I think I've been protecting myself from this exact night since I was 22 years old, sitting at your kitchen table." She was quiet again, and when she spoke, her voice had something in it I hadn't heard from her in years, something worn soft at the edges. "Baby, I spent so long teaching you how to survive a room like that man built for you, I forgot to teach you how to walk into one and own it." She let that sit for a second. Then she said the thing I'd carry with me longer than almost anything else in this whole story. "The people who taught you to be smaller were protecting themselves, not you." I was scared, Mariah. I've been scared since Wendell Cross. And I taught you my scared like it was wisdom. I sat down on the floor of that hotel room with my back against the bed frame and cried in a way I hadn't let myself do since the driveway. Quiet, ugly, both hands pressed against my mouth so the people in the next room wouldn't hear me. Not because Daniel had left, because my mother had just handed me, at 34 years old, the exact shape of the fear I'd been carrying around my entire adult life like it belonged to me, when really, I'd just been keeping it warm for her. If you've ever inherited somebody else's caution and mistaken it for your own good sense, stay with me here. Because day 3 is when I stopped keeping it warm. Day 3 is when Daniel's attorney's office called my consulting line directly, fishing, careful, trying to find out exactly what Reyes King was worth, and for the first time in 6 years, I didn't feel the old urge to make myself smaller so nobody would come looking. I felt something else instead. I wanted them to find out exactly what I was worth. I just wanted to be the one who told them. Day 4 started with a phone call I almost let go to voicemail. I didn't recognize the number, and by that point I'd learned to be careful about numbers I didn't recognize. But something made me pick up on the third ring, standing in the hotel bathroom with a toothbrush still in my hand. "Miss King?" Reyes King, I should say. A woman's voice clipped, no wasted breath. "My name is Renata Achebe. I'm the managing partner at Halbrook Capital." I set the toothbrush down very carefully on the edge of the sink, like sudden movement might make the call disappear. Halbrook was the firm closing the $66 million deal. Halbrook was Daniel's deal, the one with his name on the press release that had already gone out that morning, the one I'd built the entire underwriting model for at that kitchen table, 6 years and 100 sleepless nights in the making. "I'm listening," I said, which was the calmest sentence I'd managed to produce out loud in 4 days. "I've had my team going through the due diligence file line by line before we finalize Friday," Renata said. "The risk memo, the valuation adjustments. All of it carries a signature line I don't recognize from any conversation I've had with Mr. Moore's office. Reyes King. I'd like to know who that is before my firm puts $66 million behind this." I sat down on the closed lid of the toilet, phone pressed hard against my ear, and told her the truth. All of it. The consulting entity, the 6 years, the fact that I was currently living out of a Marriott because the man whose company was about to close her deal had thrown me out on the driveway with a suitcase that didn't zip. Renata was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "I don't invest $66 million based on a name on a cover page, Miss Reyes-King. I invest based on who actually did the work. I'd like you at the closing dinner Friday night. I'll have my assistant send the details." I didn't sleep much that night either, but it was a different kind of not sleeping. I kept my phone on the pillow next to me, like it might ring again with someone taking it back. Day 5, I bought a dress. Not the green one Daniel liked, still hanging in a closet I no longer had access to. A new one, deep blue, simple, from a boutique on Maryland Avenue, paid for out of the Reyes-King account with my own card under my own hidden name for the very last time. I stood in the dressing room mirror longer than I needed to, smoothing the fabric over my hip with both hands, and thought about my mother stirring a pot on her stove, telling me she'd made herself too easy to see. I thought, not this time. Friday night, the dinner was at a private room above a steakhouse downtown, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a maitre d' who says your name like he's known you for years. I arrived 7 minutes late on purpose, which cost me something in nerve I didn't know I had left to spend. When I walked in, Daniel was already at the head of the table in a charcoal suit, Rolex catching the light every time he moved his wrist, mid-sentence, gesturing at a slide on a screen behind him. "And this is the new team taking Elevate forward," he was saying. And I watched him gesture toward Camille Ostrander sitting to his right in a sharp black dress, her expression unreadable, and toward an empty chair beside her he hadn't bothered to fill yet. Camille's been instrumental in tightening up our acquisitions process. Real talent. Renata Achebe was seated at the far end, hands folded, watching the door instead of the slide. She saw me before Daniel did. Something shifted in her face, not quite a smile, more like a woman confirming a fact she'd already decided was true. "Actually," Renata said, cutting cleanly across whatever Daniel was about to say next, "before we move to the signing, I'd like to introduce someone. I asked her here personally." She gestured toward the door. "Toward me." Daniel turned around. I want to describe his face carefully, because I've replayed it more times than I'd like to admit. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was confusion, the specific confusion of a man watching two pieces of his life touch each other in a room where they were never supposed to meet. Then I watched him do the math. I watched his eyes go from me to the folder in front of Renata with a tab labeled Risk Assessment Reyes-King, to me again, and I watched 6 years rearrange themselves behind his eyes in about 4 seconds. "This is Mariah," Renata said, to the table, not to him. "Though you may know her work as Reyes-King. She got the risk memo that got this deal past my board. She caught a $4 million valuation error nobody on either side flagged. I don't sign checks this size without shaking the hand that actually did the work, Mr. Moore." So we waited. Nobody said anything for a moment. A server refilled a water glass somewhere down the table, ice clinking, absurdly loud in the silence. Camille was the one who finally moved, and it wasn't toward Daniel. She turned her whole body toward me, studying my face like she was checking it against something in her memory, and I watched her arrive at her own private, terrible math. "You built the model," she said quietly. Not a question either. He told me he built that model himself. He told me that's why he trusted my instincts enough to hire me, because he said he understood underwriting from the ground up. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. Her face did something I recognized from my own mirror 4 days earlier. The exact moment a story you've been standing inside collapses out from under you. Daniel finally found his voice, low, urgent, meant only for me, even though the whole table could hear it. "Mariah, we should talk about this outside." "There's nothing to talk about outside," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, steadier than I'd been able to manage in 4 days of hotel ceilings and cold sandwiches. "Everything either of us needs to say is already sitting in that folder in front of Renata." Camille stood up first. She didn't look at Daniel again. She picked up her clutch, said something quiet and clipped to Renata about following up Monday, and walked out of that private room without another word, her heels sharp against the floor, and I understood she wasn't leaving because of me. She was leaving because she just learned exactly what kind of man builds a career on borrowed work and calls it his own, and she wasn't interested in becoming his next chapter. If you've ever sat in a room and watched somebody finally see you, really see you, After years of looking straight through you like glass, you know there's no single feeling for it. It isn't triumph, not clean triumph anyway. It's something closer to grief and relief holding hands, standing very still, waiting to see which one of them speaks first. 3 months later, Daniel packed up the guest room himself. No movers, no assistant, just him on a Saturday afternoon with a stack of flattened boxes from the hardware store on Manchester Road. Because the divorce settlement gave me 60 days to clear out anything I wanted from the house, and I hadn't wanted much. A few books. My mother's old jewelry box. Not the furniture, not the art we'd picked out together at an estate sale in Clayton, none of it. I told my lawyer to just let him keep it. I didn't need the house to remember what I'd built inside it. He found the drawer at the bottom of the desk I used to work at, the one pushed into the corner of the guest room because it had never occurred to either of us that it deserved better placement than that. He told me about it weeks later, on the phone, in a voice I'd never heard him use before, smaller than I remembered, like something had been let out of him, the way something had been let out of my mother, the day she got that letter from Wendell Cross's lawyer. Inside the drawer were index cards. Dozens of them, rubber-banded into small stacks by year. Everyone started the same way. M. Ray's King recommends. Underneath, in my own handwriting, the actual thinking behind every deal I'd ever touched, the warehouse depreciation error, the Halbrook risk memo, small notes to myself about instincts I'd trusted even when nobody asked me to trust them out loud. I'd started keeping them years earlier, back when the hidden name still felt like a wall instead of a wound, because writing M. Ray's King recommends on a card nobody else would ever read was the only place I let myself sound certain. Proud, even. It was a small, private rebellion against a much larger and quieter surrender. Daniel read through them sitting on the floor of that guest room, he told me, for almost 2 hours. He said he kept waiting to feel angry, and it never came. What came instead was the specific, awful arithmetic of understanding exactly how much of his own success had been built by hands he'd never once thought to ask about. Not because he was cruel. He wasn't a cruel man, not really. And I want you to understand that, because I've stopped needing him to be a villain in order to make sense of what happened to us. He was just a man who'd never been taught to ask the question, whose work is this? Because his whole life, the answer had always simply been assumed. Mine. I don't even know what to do with these, he said to me on the phone. And I could hear, underneath the words, a man trying to figure out whether he was allowed to grieve something he'd thrown away with his own hands. Do you want them back? No, I told him. Keep them. I don't need the proof anymore. I already know. That was the whole conversation. No apology that landed the way apologies are supposed to land in stories like this. No dramatic reconciliation. No slow-motion realization that undid 4 days on a driveway and 6 years at a kitchen table. Just a man alone with a drawer of index cards and a woman on the other end of the phone who felt something complicated and quiet instead of triumphant grief for the marriage that had genuinely once been good, sitting right next to relief that she was no longer the only one who had to carry the weight of what it actually cost. I started my own firm that same month. Small, just me, and a part-time analyst named Odalus I found through a friend of my mother's, working out of a rented office, not unlike the one above the laundromat on West Florissant, where I used to do my homework while my mother worked numbers that never got credited to her either. Preston Vale reached out once, a few weeks after the dinner, offering to bring me a client list in exchange for a piece of the new firm he'd left Daniel's company, not long after Camille did, angling, same as always, for whatever came next. I didn't take the deal. I understood by then what it costs to build something on somebody else's usefulness, even when that somebody is trying to help you. I found my own first client instead. A small industrial portfolio deal, nothing close to $66 million, and I didn't need it to be. The contract came by email on a Tuesday morning. I printed it at my new desk, in my new office, with my mother's old jewelry box sitting on the shelf behind me and a mug of coffee going lukewarm beside the keyboard. And I read through every page slowly, the way I always do, looking for the thing everybody else might miss. There wasn't an error this time, just clean numbers and a signature line waiting for a name. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady, which surprised me a little. Given everything, I didn't write M. Ray's King. I wrote Mariah King, full and plain and mine, the same name I'd been born with, the same name I'd been married under, the same name I'd spent 6 years hiding behind a maiden name and a fear I'd inherited from a kitchen in Ferguson I didn't choose, and finally, quietly, put down. If you've ever done the work and let somebody else wear the credit, if you've ever built a version of yourself small enough to feel safe instead of true enough to feel whole, I hope you hear this the way I needed to hear it. Nobody is coming to introduce you in a room you haven't walked into yourself. Write the whole name, every time, starting today, not tomorrow.